While the refuge was established to protect migratory birds, there are many other wildlife species on Chincoteague. Its pine forests are home to white-tailed deer and sika, an Asian elk released on Chincoteague in the early 1920s, long before it was a national wildlife refuge. Today, because of the growing recognition of the damage that non-native plants and animals can cause, the sika would not have been released. Sikas compete with the native white-tailed deer for the same food and space, and the habitat can show signs of overuse. Since there are no natural predators to control the sika's rapidly expanding population, the refuge allows a carefully controlled and limited hunt for sika in the fall and winter. When the white-tailed deer population blooms, it too is brought into balance by a limited hunt. Another species native to the forest is the endangered Delmarva Peninsula fox squirrel, a large bushy-tailed cousin of the common gray squirrel. The squirrel's population had been in decline due to a loss of its forest habitat. Between 1968 and 1971, 30 squirrels were released on the refuge with the goal of establishing a new population that would be protected from habitat loss and hunting. Nesting boxes placed around the refuge were readily accepted, and the population soon began to increase. Periodically, a sample of squirrels is captured and their health checked. The squirrels are steadily expanding the range of their habitat and are flourishing on Chincoteague Refuge. Another species nesting in refuge forests is the bald eagle. Once so rare, they were listed as endangered on the endangered species list. Today, bald eagles are no longer in danger of extinction as their population is steadily increasing. Also flourishing is the once threatened peregrine falcon. Biologists banned newborn chicks on the refuge's nesting tower. While the forests on Chincoteague are not threatened by logging, they are vulnerable to insect infestations. In the early 1990s, the forest along Wildlife Loop was lush and green. Then in 1993, the southern pine beetle struck, killing large sections of the forest. Volunteers have planted thousands of trees to restore valuable forest habitat. The trees planted are hardwoods, which are not susceptible to southern pine beetles. Like the Asian sika, Chincoteague ponies are not a natural part of the island's ecosystem. By grazing on dunes and other sensitive habitats, the ponies can do considerable damage. The ponies are actually owned by the Chincoteague Volunteer Fire Company and are allowed on the refuge under a special use permit with strict conditions as to where and how many ponies can graze, so that sensitive wildlife habitat can be protected. In the summer, the fire department raises money by auctioning off the foals. Another non-native species that stresses refuge habitat is the mute swan, easily identified by its orange beak and black nose hump. The mute destroys wetlands by uprooting aquatic vegetation, leaving behind a barren, muddy bottom. While other swans migrate to the Arctic to nest, the mute, a native of Europe, remains here, often taking over traditional nesting sites of native birds. It was long thought that bird migratory patterns were as fixed and predictable as the seasons, but biologists at Chincoteague Refuge and many other places are noticing changes. In the past, Canada geese have always migrated to the Arctic to nest. Now, some no longer make the trip and can be seen on the refuge year-round. These new residents are putting extra pressure on food resources. Over the years, the number of cattle egrets on the refuge has increased. Native to Africa, some cattle egrets immigrated to South America in the late 1800s. They reached Texas and Florida during the 1940s, and in 1957 were found nesting near the refuge. The glossy ibis is another recent immigrant from the south. Before the 1940s, the glossy ibis nested only in Florida, but over the years they have extended their range northward, reaching the refuge by the mid-1950s. Keeping track of these shifting migration trends and monitoring the rise and fall of the different populations of birds migrating through Chincoteague is a daunting task. Most shorebird species visit the refuge only briefly during their long migrations from one end of the earth to the other. To get reliable estimates of these transient populations requires that the birds be identified and counted in a rigorously consistent manner. Refuge staff and volunteers begin their bird survey at precisely the same time every week.
You got these turns right out on the beach.
They make the same loop each time at the same pace, identifying and counting the birds. The goal is not to try and count every bird on the refuge, but by visually sampling the same way each time, a statistical baseline is established. From this baseline, using the same technique the U.S. Census uses, the population of a species can be projected. The data gathered can provide an early warning if a species population begins to decline.
You got a piping plover and two turnstones.
One shorebird whose numbers have been in a downward spiral is the piping plover, federally listed as threatened. Piping plovers nest on the refuge and are intensively managed to increase their population. Pipers begin to arrive to stake out their territories in late February when the beaches are deserted. By late April and into May, eggs are laid in a depression lined with broken shells on the open beach. Because the nests are vulnerable to gulls, crows, and grackles, as well as foxes and raccoons, protective exclosures are built while the eggs are incubated. In about 30 days, the chicks hatch and immediately begin feeding on their own, carefully shepherded by their parents. The hatch often occurs as the weather warms and beachgoers arrive. Because the flightless chicks may be disturbed, the refuge closes those areas of the beach where piping plover chicks are active. Even though refuge biologists keep a close watch, the mortality rate for plover chicks is high. Not only can predators and disturbance become a problem, but high winds and waves can wipe out a year's production in a single storm. The refuge is also concerned about other open beach nesters, such as black skimmers and oyster catchers, least and common terns. Sections of the beach where nests or chicks are found are also closed during the nesting season. While these closures may inconvenience some beachgoers, the refuge is required by law to put the welfare of wildlife first, particularly for those species in trouble. The barrier islands that are home to Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge are like rivers of sand, always on the move. As waves pull sand from one area to deposit it down current, and storms and high waters carry sand inland. For most of its history, Chincoteague wasn't an island, but a long, narrow, sandy peninsula with farms and even a village where the refuge now sits. Storms would often breach the peninsula, creating an inlet to the bay, but after time, shifting sands would close the opening.